Yeah, I've been asked by many people what I did at WHO and how it was. So I thought it was easier to report on in one go to everybody. And so I have no clue, but I think you're quite a number of people already. So I wanted to go to WHO, and this was made possible by first the management. Okay, it took a little bit of convincing, I have to say, a couple of months, but then it was agreed by Thomas and also, of course, by Patrick. But it was also made possible because in the meantime, people would back my work up. I mean, I'm not doing a lot because they could do it on top of what they do. And so Spiros has been acting head of sector in the meantime. Sandra has been the liaison during my stay at WHO. And Jane Mosley has taken scientific advice while Spiros was doing the head of sector. I received a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Because it allowed me to rent a studio for 3 months. But this was made possible because I had established some contact with the WHO, and in particular the department which is called EMP-MAR, so Essential Medicines and Pharmaceutical Policies and Rational Use of Medicines. And the two people in particular I had been in contact with were Sue Hill and Claire Ondery. You know that we have or we don't have, I don't know where we are now, confidentiality arrangement, but that was not part because it's only on pre-qualification, and it's not really what we've been doing. I was living in Switzerland, but as you know, Switzerland is not part of the EU yet. So they are worse than us, probably for abbreviations, because they use all the time abbreviation. You have GF and GDF, and it's not the same thing. You have all the regions of the WHO with their funny names of Euro, Afro, Zero. But it's probably, I don't know, from an outside view, in any case, it's quite difficult to know where you are. Maybe more importantly, currently the money that is spent on health is quite impressive. We're talking billions of US dollars, and the donors for WHO are maybe a surprise to you, but they're mostly member states, and I will explain a little bit. But they are not just member states, they are also donors, private foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There are some member states who add to their normal granting of money to the as per the United Nations agreement, and the money is administered by 1,000 of various organizations, either from the WHO or from a foundation or from a public-private partnership. It's extremely complex. And of course, the main diseases that are administered and targeted are the ones that are killing most of the people. And this is a very different perspective from what we have in Europe. When we discuss medicine, we're discussing improvement in health, but the 99% of the mortality occurs in Africa and in mostly. So it is really a different picture. We're talking about saving lives with very simple treatment. Most of them are already available, but they're not just available to the people who should receive them. So also a reminder that people may have some money spent on health, but they are not necessarily spending how much they should, which is the target is 15%. And you can see from the dots that we are far below what, according in the various regions, it's far below the target of 15%. And many people are spending $1 to $5 US per year on health. Can imagine trying to get anything in this country for $5. The WHO itself has been created. It's one of the agencies of the United Nations. So it was created following the Second World War with this idea of creating part of the United Nations initiative, which was to prevent further conflicts and develop peace. And one important aspect was immediately identified as health. And health is defined not just as the lack of disease, it's defined as well-being. So it covers much more than just treating diseases. But of course, in some regions and some countries, the first thing is not to die. So the structure of WHO, if you want to simplify it, you have a World Health Assembly, an executive board, and a director general with the headquarters. In practice, it's a little more complicated. The World Health Assembly is made of representatives of the member states of the United Nations. So we are currently having 190 plus countries in the world that are part of the United Nations, and they have one representative, and they meet once a year in May for the World Health Assembly, and they actually decide on how WHO should function, they establish policies, and they agree the budget program. However, because such a large assembly cannot decide for an organization like WHO, they elect 34 members, which are a steering group, if you want, called the Executive Board, and the Executive Board meets twice a year. So it met in January when I was there. It is an operational body, so it's much more it's closer to the business, and it reports back to the Health Assembly once a year. The World Health Assembly also elects the Director General, and the Director General resides in the headquarters in Geneva. And then you have a very strange situation because you also have 6 regions, which are the African one, the European one, the West Pacific, the Southeast Asia. There is the America one, which is different because it has its own structure, and there's sort of mini WHO regulating Americas because the US are in America and they don't want to be ruled by an agency, and they are ruled by their own system. So it has a lot in common with the rest of the structure of WHO, but it's slightly a bit different. But you can see from the gray zone that I have put that this strange hierarchical structure is completely disconnected. The Director General is elected by the World Health Assembly, as I said, and regulates the headquarters where you have 2,000 people in Geneva. But the regions are functioning completely independently, and the country representative of WHO elect their regional heads, and these regional heads are running the WHO, the 6,000 people in the countries. And in between, there is no hierarchical link. So it means that if the region wants to do something and the director wants to do something else, bad luck. So it's quite a problem, and it translates into difficulties in making the things work because there is no link. They don't obey the Director General. Can you imagine if all head of sector could not obey the executive director? Sorry, Andreas. So the Director General is Margaret Chan, as you probably know. She comes from the People's Republic of China. She was elected in 2006, and she has a background in public health, and she was made famous by dealing with the SARS. Some people said it was not so good, but I don't know. I cannot judge. So this is the executive board meeting. You can see that it's very much like the UN meetings, and not so different actually from our meeting, except that it's not around the table. And the WHO headquarters in Geneva are quite nice. They are in the middle of the northern part of Geneva. And this is this long building, which is quite impressive. The core functions have been defined since the 50s, and probably currently, I would say the WHO is looking at whether they need to revise their mandate and simplify, because they are, I will mention it on several occasions, they are undergoing a big crisis because of the source of funding and because of the economical situation, the lack of confidence from the donors in how they manage the money and what they do, and the discrepancy between the funding and the strategy. But the objective is really engaging in partnerships to do joint action. So there is a lot of which is done and translate into this thousands of organizations that are doing public-private partnerships or different types of partnership. Within the WHO, you have different partnerships like Stop TB, and which liaise with the TB Alliance, which is a private organization. And so it's really very, very complicated, and I'm sure they don't know exactly what they're doing in many situations. They want to produce knowledge, shaping the research agenda, and in principle for, of course, their priorities, which are the big killers. It's clear that WHO is not interested in the late stage of cancers. They have a department, you will see, that works with aging, but in many countries, aging is not really the issue because people are dead before they get old. They have a huge work of setting norms. So they do, for example, in my preferred area, growth charts for children. They do standards, they do guidelines. As you know, we have participated as EMA in many guidelines. And they also define policy. They have a policy on tobacco, for example. They also deal with food and certain elements which are always related to health. They provide technical support that's more also at the level of the countries. They do, for example, they help the regulatory agencies for medicine to develop, to establish their own framework. They have drafted, for example, a draft legislation on medicine. So what do you need if you want to have a medicine that is authorized? You need to have inspection. So they draft a sort of framework for inspection. They draft a model for authorization. They draft a sort of CTD for the world. So these countries can just use the tool and implement it in their own language and in their own country. It's a sort of ready-made framework for them to use rather than to reinvent and forget certain points. So these are a lot of things that they do to provide technical support. They do a lot of training to develop capacity in, of course, in regulatory, but also in all aspects of health. They train health carers, and they monitor the health situation, which means that they produce thousands of reports. I had a picture of you have this long corridor, which is probably 50 meters long, with piles of report behind walls. But this, I lost the picture, sorry. But it shows you, I don't know if these reports are ever read by anybody, but they produce thousands of reports. So they have, at the headquarters, defined various areas, a little bit like our units or our sectors. There is one which is called Info Evidence Research, which works on e-health, so the common standards for health. There is one which is maybe the one that you know more, which is the one working with infectious disease, HIV, TB, neglected disease. And that's where you find all these activities and initiatives, which are a mix of partnerships and special programs within WHO. So the Stop TB for tuberculosis, Rollback Malaria, all the programs on HIV, and the Global Drug Fund, which is not to be mixed up with the Global Fund, which works on TB. There is a department for family where they look at maternal, child health, child and adolescent health, and they deal with vaccine as well and reproduction, contraception. They have one special department for all the activities they develop in case of crisis. One for a secure environment, and that's where some people were involved during the pandemic, and they deal with seasonal flu as well, food and chemicals. The health system services is more about policies, health policies, and this is where the department where I was is, these famous essential medicines and pharmaceutical policies and rational use of medicines. And they also have one on non-communicable disease. And I said they work on aging. They work also on chronic diseases, because as soon as the countries move from low income, we talk now more of politically correct, of low income rather than developing, because they're still developing after 20 or 30 years, and developed countries. So we low income, middle income, high income. They work also on mental health, on nutrition, injuries and violence. It's just extract of what they do. Actually, it's much more complex every time. So they work with many other organizations, UNAIDS for HIV, UNITAID, which is a financial process which deals with procurement. So they group, it's working together, you're stronger. So this is what UNITAID does. From the financial perspective, it helps countries to procure medicine at a cheap price, because they group the request, and they go in with one body, goes to the pharmaceutical company to negotiate the prices. UNICEF, which is another UN agency in charge of child and education, and who does a lot of program on vaccination. There is a new group which has been created recently, which is a patent pool. They serve also, again, as a financial intermediary between the pharmaceutical companies who are the owners of the patent and the countries that are buying patented medicines, in order to lower the price of, because again, you have one body to discuss this with, rather than several countries in single actions. They have a number of global health initiatives which correspond to what the Millennium Development Goals. These Millennium Development Goals were established in 2000 and their name, and I will describe a little bit what they are. And they were established by the G8 in the G8 summit in 2000. So they have, for example, a Global Alliance for Vaccine Initiative, a global fund against, again, it's malaria, TB, and HIV. A Millennium Foundation that has been created. So there are hundreds of them. It's extremely difficult to know which one is why they do. And of course, there is a lot of overlap in what they do. And they're a little bit fighting. Some of them have funding, so they are more powerful than the ones who have no funding are intermediate. NGOs have a special status in WHO, and they have to be by law of the WHO. They have to be recognized, and they establish a memorandum of understanding with WHO, and then they can attend the World Health Assembly as members. And you have lots of religious organizations that are coming in, but also the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the BMGF, a new initiative which is a public-private partnership targeting the development of medicine for neglected disease, the NDI. So you have a number of various partners, and they all, of course, look for money, and they go for the one who pay. So the budget of 2000 of WHO was 3.3 billion US dollars. So it's not bad. I'm sure Andreas would love to have such a budget. But as you can see, in practice, a very small proportion come from the member state. That was originally the only source of funding of the WHO, and it's currently less than that. It is probably between 10 and 20% as of today. So it means in practice that it's worse than the MEA, because the whole policies of WHO are only funded by donors who may decide that they will either give money, the blank check, this is $1 billion, take it and do whatever you want with it, or they can say, I am going to put $500 million on this particular topic, and I'm not interested in the rest, and you can only use the money for that. As you can imagine, it makes the fact that you have a strategy at the level of an organization, and the fact that the funding comes in a different way or a different place, very difficult to manage. And also it creates a lot of competition within WHO, because you have the lucky guys who get some funding from the donors, because the rest is ridiculous, and the unlucky guys who have no funding, even if they have a project which should be funded. So the ones that have the funding are the powerful people in the WHO, and the ones who have no funding have to follow and to contribute, and they don't necessarily like it. So these 80 or 90% of voluntary contribution are detailed on the right, and you can see that it can still come from member states. For example, Japan, the US, France, UK, Australia are heavy contributors to WHO budget. They add billion of money, euros, whatever, to the budget of WHO on their own initiative. It's more than their contribution through the UN. But you have also the foundation, and the role in particular of the Bill Gates Foundation is increasing over time, and I will mention it a little later. So this, just to give you a figure, I looked at their financial report, and in 2009, they have given more than 5.2 billion US dollar in one single year as charitable donation, which is quite impressive. As you know, Bill and Melinda Gates have given all their fortune and leaving very little to their children. They said that they don't want to be they should not be born among the lucky sperm donors. Sorry, it comes from them. They are giving 99% of their money to. They're also supported by Warren Buffett, as you probably know. He's a philanthropist, has been one of the richest men on the planet. He has also given 99% of his fund, and he has made it a condition. He gives the money to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation under the condition that what he gives over several years. What he gives, the foundation should give out more than his own donation. So if he gives 20 billion a year, the foundation must have spent more than 20 billion that year. Interesting. How is the money spent? So it's you have a display here of the way the money is spent by WHO, and you can see on the right that you have the use by regions, but you have an interesting figure on the right, which is of course the headquarters, taking quite a large bit of the money. Now the Millennium Development Goals were agreed, as I said, in 2000 by the G8, and they have 8 aims, which are very simple, and this is the idea of reducing and correcting the current situation. And the one that are of most interest for us are the number 3 and to 6, because they are the first one because I like it, and the 3 others because they are important for WHO. No, I'm joking. It's also part of this. Just to give you an idea how they meet the Millennium Development Goal. For example, on this one in 2010, they plan to spend 5.3 million on women and gender issues and empowering women, and the funding is detailed on this slide. So just to show you how it works in practice, so that they, of course, assign some money to certain projects. The fourth one is the one that I'm working with, and just to remind you what the size of the problem we are discussing. Currently, more than 8 million children below the age of 5 are dying every year in the world, and you can see at the bottom, 49% come from 5 countries, including China and India, the largest countries in the world. So this is quite a significant number and a serious problem. And you can see the causes of death. And if you look at it, the largest one is pneumonia. And we currently have treatment for pneumonia. It's not something that you cannot treat. It's something that is treatable. We just need amoxicillin. We need a combination drug that can be administered to young children and that can be distributed. So these are also another way of presenting the same data of the cause of death among children of under 5, and in particular the high level of death at neonatal age. The number 5 development goal is about maternal health, so it's related to pregnancy. And don't forget also that being pregnant is a death penalty for many women in many situations. And the relative risk I've put at the bottom of this slide show you that 3 women in 100,000 that are pregnant die in Ireland, whereas it is 1,400 in Afghanistan. And war is not helping in this situation because it prevents health carers to get to the people. So the 6th Millennium Development Goal is combat diseases. It's mostly HIV, malaria, other diseases, neglected disease, TB, and so on. Just to give you also a few examples on malaria, for example, the initiative within WHO, which is called Rollback Malaria, has a current budget of $1.5 billion. 50% of it comes from donors, but the needs are estimated to 45. Between the cautious approach is 38, the more realistic approach is $45 billion. The way the money is spent and the funding for that this initiative, you can see that it is funded by donors and spent on the private household or at the national level. Regarding research and development, which is of interest to us because many of these projects are based on medicines, not just that, because there are also trials, for example, on the use of bed nets, which are comparing bed nets, impregnated bed nets versus or closing the windows and the doors of houses. And you can see that, again, the Bill and Melinda Gates and the NIH are the main donors for this area. Polio is another initiative. You may know that the WHO had as a main goal to eradicate polio after eradicating smallpox. They wanted to eradicate polio, but the problem is you have chronic shedders of polio viruses, and you have areas where they escape the vaccination, and then they reinfest the other because also the lack of hygiene and sanitation makes the fact that they're contaminating the water and the other people get the polio. So you have little outbreaks of polio in various areas, in particular in India or in Africa. And in 2009, 50 countries which were free became again observing outbreaks, but 10 of them have been able to discontinue that. So these are the type of action that the WHO is doing. I just wanted to highlight that it's not the permanent catastrophe. There are also achievements. In 1978, you may remember that the last cases of smallpox was described. Since then, there hasn't been a case of smallpox in the wild. There has been, I think, one contamination in a lab, 2 deaths. The guy who was responsible for the leak committed suicide because he thought he had launched smallpox to the world. The initiative on polio has vaccinated 2 billion children, so very efficient in a way, but still polio is not eradicated. And if you look at child mortality, 8.9 million childhood a year, but we come from 12.4 million a year. So what I've been doing at WHO myself, I have been working on the essential medicines list. I will explain a little bit on the pediatric medicines regulatory network, on clinical trial guidance for assessors, on a regulatory framework for pediatric medicine, tuberculosis fixed drug combination, some presentation to WHO, trying to understand the system, but also because I was there, they said, oh, because you were here, can you give us regulatory advice on just anything? For example, it was on poliovirus excretors. I'm absolutely not a specialist of this, but they wanted to know which path. And so, for example, I can recommend scientific advice, and you can say, well, if you do this, you would have to go this way or this route, for example, because it is an antiviral, so it falls under the mandatory scope. So if you want to register your product, your medicine at EMA, it will be the mandatory scope. I've discussed with the patent pool, and I'm going to make a presentation in July. I also took the opportunity, because I was in Geneva, to discuss with Swissmedic, because they are currently implementing the pediatric regulation in Switzerland, and they wanted to discuss pluses and the minuses of the European initiative. And I gave a training for an afternoon to an NGO, the DNDi initiative, because they are developing medicines and they wanted to discuss regulatory pathways again. So what I didn't do, ski, okay, well, just one weekend. Eating too much chocolate, you are eating the rest. But it was also very, very nice, I must say, because they have no meetings. They are poorly organized, so there is no meeting. I didn't have to manage people. I love people, but still. And I was certainly not bored. So among the essential medicines, the issue is not just authorization and availability of formulation, as we would tend to see, because the remit of the European Medicines Agency is very limited. Actually, when at WHO they look at the problem, they have to look from A to Z, which means development, manufacturing, formulation themselves, evaluation, authorization, procurement, distribution, making sure that the product will go actually into the countries. Then when it is in the countries, that it will reach the pharmacies at the end of the country, then that there are guidelines on how to use the medicine, that there is training of healthcare on how to use the medicine, that it is prescribed, right, and not something else, that there is free access of or reimbursement for the patient, because of course in many countries it is either that or eat. And of course that is administration monitoring. I'm not even talking about pharmacovigilance because they are not yet there. So the essential medicines list itself is identifying a subset of medicines which have to be procured by any government in the world. So meaning if you want to treat the major plagues of people, you have to have these medicines. So it's currently a list of about 60 or 90 products. I don't know exactly the number, but it's really addressing the major problems. The choice is made based on evidence, which means systematic reviews and cost effectiveness. And of course, because for many of these situations, we're talking about all the products, it is based on off-patent medicine. But for for HIV or for a TB, hopefully we will get new products and they might be on patent. And that's where, for example, the patent pool organization and Unitaid will come into play, because they will intervene in the financial aspect of procuring these medicines. So the list itself is a long list, but it has a subset So the list includes medicine for adults and for children, but you also have a repetition of the list only for children. And within the list, you have something which is called complementary, which is when the medicines require specific monitoring or hospitalization or things like that. So it's a bit complicated because some people call it the list C for children or C for complementary. The expert committee which decides on the list meets every 2 years. I was lucky because there was one in March. And in order to update the list, they commission or they receive spontaneously from some academic groups, Cochrane collaboration, systematic reviews of the literature. And some medicines are proposed for deletion, others for addition or for modification. And there is a sort of review of the hot topics in the list. The process is transparent. The applications are put on the web. Everybody can contribute. You can comment on an application if it comes to your head to do comments, you can do that. It will be posted. You can send an email. And then there is a preparatory work, which I contributed to, which consists in summarizing all the evidence and make it digestible for the expert committee. The experts are also looking at the evidence. And then you prepare the draft report, which is currently about 125 pages, where you summarize the evidence and you summarize why the committee has taken certain positions. So it's not so different from an assessment report. It's much more reduced. As you can imagine, because it's based on published literature on things that are accessible to everybody, it is not dealing with data that are not accessible to the public, like pharmacovigilance. And in my view, this is a big gap in their process because they don't have access to safety data. And they are, of course, biased towards efficacy because everybody reports on what works, but very few people report on what doesn't work. So that was a picture of the expert committee, which took place in Ghana, in Accra, and I was lucky to go there. Then the other thing I did, as I said, is to work on the pediatric medicines regulatory network. I am currently chairing this network, which was established following the objective of the fourth goal on a recommendation from the World Health Assembly to have pediatric medicines available, and also in combination with the essential medicines list. So this network was established in 2009, and we have currently only 27, or already 27, regulatory authorities, national regulatory authorities, that are participating to the network. And we have a teleconference with the steering committee, and we try to exchange information and to create capacity building to identify gaps and so on. And there is a web page on the WHO web page here. So, and I also translated into French because I will say later, the French part, the French-speaking part of WHO is a bit weak, and so I've used my native language to try to develop the French-speaking part. I've also worked on a draft pediatric clinical trial guidance, which is intended for assessors. If they receive a pediatric trial, what is important for them, how can they assess it, what they should look at. And of course, we've used the experience of the PIPs, but I've realized we have few examples of what is available for assessors, how you do your work. So this has been going through consultation and is currently with WHO to be going for public consultation. I am now also in another area, very much a blank slate, because I've been asked to look in and to do a pilot phase of looking at a regulatory agency and to see how they should modify or adapt their structure and processes in order to include or make medicines for children and formulation available. So I don't have a clear idea. I've asked questions and I've been told, you do whatever you want. That's good. So I like that. But it will be, so I'm going beginning of July to Tanzania for a couple of days Andreas, yes, you know it. To assess this agency, but it's not to make a judgment on how they are, but more to try to identify where they could improve the situation and what would help them to make sure that pediatric medicines are taken into consideration when they do their business. So on a day-to-day basis, also my personal experience. So the WHO, as I said, is in the north part of Geneva, very close to the French border, and many people live in France, actually. It's the end of the number 8 bus line, but clockwork, Switzerland, fantastic. Every minute, no problem. You have, maybe at the difference of the EMA, very low security. You show your badge, but if you follow someone, nobody cares. So you can enter, and you probably have heard about this story about the physician who, or the guy who pretended to be a physician and working at WHO. And they have security, low level of security, but security now at WHO because this guy pretended to work at WHO for 10 years, I think. He was going into the building and he had shown to his children his own office. It's more or less a bilingual organization because we are based in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, which and close to France, so many people do speak French. And all the announcements to the staff are made both in English and French. Sometimes the French is delayed by 1 or 2 days, but most of the announcements are done in both languages.
Fire drills?
Sorry?
Even for fire drills?
I haven't seen a fire drill in 3 months. Maybe I should tell them that they miss it. I think it happens, but it's not as frequent as here. And they don't have 10 minutes of announcements. There is far more diversity than at the EMEA because, of course, you have African people, people from Asia, so it's actually much more diverse. Just also detail, the meals are not subsidized. It makes a huge difference, I can tell you. As I said, you have long corridors and of thousands of reports. I don't know if anybody read them. But what is maybe the more positive aspect, and everywhere I've met very competent people who know what they're talking about, who spend a lot of time in the countries, in the areas, and are really highly specialized in their area. So that's the view from the office, and the window can open. That is good, I can tell you. I can see the Mont Blanc. But on the maybe less good side, it took 2 days to get my computer working, and I had to change 3 times the office in 2 days. The IT help desk is in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, which means that when the printer next to your door fails, you have to call Kuala Lumpur. Then they will call someone else at WHO, long 500 meters further, and the guy, when he has the time, will come to repair the printer. So IT at the EMA is much better, I can tell you. Because I had the status of a trainee, I didn't get a phone line because that's forbidden for trainees, no landline, so I couldn't even receive a call. I don't mean making a call, I couldn't receive a call, but they gave me a BlackBerry. Don't ask me why. It seems to be, there was a little bit of hot desking. As I said, I changed office 3 times the 2 first days, but then after that, I changed only 3 or 4 times. There is very little staff management. The performance evaluation are done if they have the time, and if they are not done, nobody bothers. Some people disappear. They are not on sick leave. They are not on annual leave. They have just disappeared for years. They're still paid, and nobody knows what they do. There is very little communication, which is probably the worst in this organization. They don't know what the left hand does, and they don't know what the others are doing. I remember one day we had a request from WHO to organize a meeting on HIV guideline, and Nathalie Seigneur had told them that the HIV guideline had already been done by another department in WHO. So it shows you that there is a lot that could be improved in this area. I mentioned already the competition based on funding. And currently, the most important thing is that they are going through this major crisis. They are firing people. They are not renewing contracts. It's far worse than here, I can tell you, because 14 days before the end of the contract, people don't know if they will have a renewal of their contract. So again, and they are looking at their mandate to see if they should focus on some priority areas. But there is a very big crisis, and they are not recruiting currently. They are putting people in earlier retirement. And for example, the Ansar Ghazal, who is the head of department for medicine, essential medicines, has retired 2 weeks ago and is not replaced. And they are going to merge the device department and the essential medicine. So essential devices, essential medicines, they are going to merge the 2 departments. Of course, you have several heads. So who is going to be the chief? Who is going to be the Indian? That remains to be determined. But it creates a lot of bad mood and bad feelings because there are a lot of uncertainty. And I really appreciate what is done here to make things much more transparent. So just a little bit of a smile on Switzerland and Geneva, because I'm French, and you know we always have this thing with the Swiss. So clearly it's a city of peace, and you have the United Nations, the other one from New York. You have the Red Cross, you have lots of things. You have Swiss clocks, you have chocolate, you have the pen knives. and you have a representation of the peace everywhere. But as you know, the Swiss are neutral, and they mean that they choose the stronger side. It's not necessarily a progressive country, because they gave women the right to vote in 1971. So to conclude, it's very complex. It was a very fascinating experience, and I'm very glad I could do it. Clearly, this is an area, an organization that is undergoing major changes, and because the structure dates back from the 50s, and clearly the world has changed. But it's made of people who are very interested and very competent and very devoted to their cause, even if they're competing very highly. And I've identified areas where I think we could really do a good job with WHO, which could be linked to our core business, pharmacovigilance, because they need the information, and identifying experts that would be ready to join the expert committee for essential medicine would be, in my view, a good thing. We certainly have to contribute to capacity building by providing training. When we do our own training, we could invite people from WHO. There is also a will to make the Article 58 procedures more attractive, more flexible, more sexy. And so that is something we can work on. And just to remind you that we have invaded Switzerland some time ago. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. I'm not sure I can answer all questions, because there are lots of things I don't know, but feel free.
In terms of the Millennium Developmental Goals, how many of them are kind of being achieved, and how's the ongoing kind of monitoring and re-looking at them going to happen?
None of them have been achieved. They are long-term goals of over 20 years, but they are on their way to improving. And as I showed, the child mortality is decreasing. I wanted to show you, but I couldn't retrieve the element. The mortality continues to decrease. It's not, one step and then remains at the same level. So all these measures are taken to improve the situation, are set up. And for example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is very interesting, because they use financial process. They are not philanthropic in a way. They define projects, they implement them, they check that they work, they revise them, and it's really about a financial and a business approach to health, rather than a sort of goodwill, nice but incompetent.
About the MDGs, is there a worry within the WHO that the objectives won't be reached in 2015? Is there any concern within the organization?
Sorry, I haven't heard what you said.
Is there any concerns within the WHO that the Millennium Development Goals won't be reached?
Yes, of course, they are concerned. For example, the eradication of polio, which was one of their objectives, has failed in a way, because they were very close to getting it eradicated. And maybe, I don't know if Bo wants to comment on that, but the fact that wars, people moving, migrating, and carrying the disease to other countries as reinfected, they have problem that it's not so easy to eradicate polio, So now they are more looking at stabilizing the disease, preventing and avoiding further, but they probably won't reach all of them, but they are working toward these goals.
Sorry, I'm hidden behind the pillar. I just wanted to see if you could develop concerning the meetings, because you were saying that they were not having so many meetings, and then I'm just wondering how they organize their work and how they organize the communication between the different teams.
Yeah, as I said, there's very little communication, which explains also why they don't have meetings, because they don't talk to each other, and they work in isolation. So they very much have their own work, and it's very rare that they talk about what they are doing and they agree together a strategy. It seems to be a word that is not liked. So they don't have meetings, full stop, because they don't talk to each other. Or they don't talk to each other because they don't have meetings. I don't know which one goes first.
Yes, access to medicine for the low-income countries. The political issues has always been on patents. A recent report from Oxfam has indicated that regulatory problems is one of the issues that is hindering the access to the medicine, access of medicine to the developing world. This has also an impact with other policies in Europe, for example, on counterfeits of medicine. And I just was wondering whether at the WHO they consider the regulatory issues for low-income countries that are blocking the access to their population of medicine in the same sort of, with the same importance than the patents issue.
I can't make a comparison of the importance of each process, but as I said, it's a chain of events that makes a medicine available to the people who need them. It's a very long chain, and any of these elements, should it be broken, then the chain doesn't work, because if you don't have anybody to manufacture the product, it doesn't matter if you have a patent issue, because there is no manufacturing. If you don't have research to develop the new product for TB, for example, then you don't have a new treatment for TB at all. But that is why, going back to the patent issue, that's why they have created in 2009 this patent pool organization, which is, again, a public-private partnership and tries to, again, by working together and making a sort of united front towards the patent owners, trying to reduce the price of for the licensees. So they serve as intermediate. It's again a financial approach to health rather than a sort of a technical one. It's really using the market forces to make the system work, and it seems to be quite successful. Companies have already engaged into this exercise, so big pharma, NIH, and the royalties are still paid, but the patent pool serves as an intermediate to reduce the price of the royalties. That's all I can say at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking the system is so different. I mean, as you say, it's business oriented, or the project. So, in a way, for example, we have a lot of problem with conflict of interest here. It's clear that they are sponsors. I suppose they are. It is transparent, but how is it managed? I suppose if there are very multiple sponsors, there is a kind of balance. But otherwise, what they do can be very, very oriented. Of course, who is financing it?
I think the conflict of interest, one point is, I think that's why they have this memorandum of understanding with WHO, because it also clarifies the power of the organization on WHO and the conflict of interest. But they have, as we have, declarations for experts. They use a lot of experts because most of their expert work is based on committees. And the problem is they don't have a policy on how to use the declarations. For example, they asked me, would you cope? Because in the expert for the essential medicines list, we had a number of experts who had a conflict of interest. And they asked me, how do you deal with this conflict? So I apply the rule of the CHMP. If you are with this conflict and you are, involved with that company, you cannot be rapporteur. They had actually appointed them as rapporteur for a particular product, which was, And so said normally they should not be rapporteur. So they can participate in the discussion, but they should not decide whether the product is on the list or not, because then the conflict of interest can express itself. So, and the expert committee is very limited. You had 13 people. So it's not a huge committee. So it's relatively easy to work with every single one of them. They come from South Africa, India, Brazil, the Philippines, and so they are a bit lost in their countries, and they have conflict of interest. But I think they have been challenged a lot on the pandemic. You remember that they had this group of experts, and in order to protect them, they didn't publish the conflict of interest. And some of them had probably not declared very transparently what they had, and when it came public, it became a problem. So I think they are thinking about it. But because the organization, the structure, is very different from EMA, it's very structured here, very organized, everything is dealt with in details. There is sort of big, vague, floating system, so that there is no policy on how to deal with conflict of interest. market.
How is the current resource crisis managed? It is managed within the regions, or something comes from the general director?
Well, it's mostly the Director General who has decided, because she has been challenged, and she has been challenged on her budget, on how she spent the money and everything. So she has now asked a small group of 2 or 3 people who are Assistant Director General, so sort of deputies, to work with her. And I talked with one of them, Paul Kieny, who has been involved in vaccine in the past. And for example, she's looking at the process of pre-qualification. I've not talked about it because that's something that we do here. And there are 4 processes of pre-qualification at WHO, 1 for medicines, 1 for vaccines, 1 for diagnostics, and 1 for devices. The 4 are in different areas of WHO. They have all established a process, completely different. And she said, well, it's probably not very efficient. If everybody does pre-qualification in a very different way, it doesn't mean that they are not working well, but why do you do it the same thing in 4? There may be specificities linked to the product, but why is it 4 different processes, different levels of so she is taking the lead in implementing changes. Her re-election is also at stake. So it's a difficult case, but the feeling of the staff is quite bad. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have the opportunity to live any health crisis being there.
No, not in 3 months when I was there, and I would not have been sent to the. It's mostly local. They have. I said there is no security at headquarters, but on the contrary, when you go into the countries, there are lots of security measures. You have to pass tests to know exactly what to do in case of crisis. So I went through some of the tests to go to Ghana. You have to know who to call, what to do. They give you advice, charge your mobile phone, refuel your car, don't do this, send your family home. It's really very organized because they have had many people killed in various wars or civil movement. And or during the epidemics, you may remember that the WHO guy in charge of SARS actually died during the epidemics of SARS. So it's not necessarily a comfortable business when you're more closer to the countries and the business. But I have not been. Yeah. Okay.
I found it very interesting when you describe the hierarchy of the World Health Organization. You have a Director General, which is the equivalent to our Executive Director. And in my understanding, in my very simple mind, I really do follow that an Executive Director should have heads of department. And those head of departments are accountable not only to their staff, of course, but very much to the executive director who has the vision and who drives the organization. How does the Director General in Geneva, how is she able to pass orders and strategy to the regions? And the people in charge of those regions, who are they accountable to? Their own countries who nominated them?
Well, that's one thing that is interesting with WHO, that they are not accountable to anybody. And they are not they don't have deliverables by a certain date, like we have, for example, to deliver opinions by a certain timeline, because they are not a governmental organization. There is nobody above, which tells them you must give me. The only one to whom they report is the World Health Assembly, the member states themselves, who are the ones sometimes not implementing the policies and strategies. So it is not, it's a sort of vicious circle. Of course, I am caricaturing a little bit. The regional directors are not necessarily against the Director General and refusing to implement any single policies. So there is sometimes a convergence of views. But because they are elected by the country people and they are not answering to the Director General, they cannot be fired if they don't do. It makes the link between the head and the legs very, very difficult. Yeah, Richard.
How will the Swiss pediatric legislation look like in comparison with the European? And when you were asked, what did you recommend and what you didn't?
I was consulted on the draft legislation, which looks very much, because I was told that in Swiss Medic you have two trends, one which is very pro-industry and doesn't want to put any burden on industry, and one which is very much pro-public health and wants to have a little bit that European system, very constraining one. So I can't tell you exactly how the people are saying, because they were not describing their own position very clearly, but I identify a number of things where there were recommendations, and we know the value of recommendation compared to the value of obligations, and it probably would not produce the result they want. This said, Switzerland knows that they are surrounded by the EU, and that they benefit anyway from the data that are generated through the EU system or the US system. So their problem is just to get the information, and to not to redo the studies. They still want to have a network of pediatric research in Switzerland. They still want to have some Swiss children involved in trials, but they, so I didn't make any recommendations, it was not my role. I just pointed out a few things that if you, depending on whether the objective was to be efficient or to have a system which produce maybe with a little bit of chance something, but probably not much. And that's what I did.